What if everything you know about indoctrination is just scratching the surface? Indoctrination is a systematic machine fueled by repetition, authority, emotion, and social pressure that runs on four hidden gears: shallow social rituals, group routines you trust, trauma-sealed convictions, and total obedience. In this video, we'll map how each cog turns and equip you and your community with the tools to seize the wheel and crash it. Are you ready to fight back? Let's dive in. Under the surface of belief, there are distinct layers of how and why people cling to ideas, each with its own social, psychological, and identity-forming contours. So let's start by defining indoctrination. For our purposes, let's work with this working definition. Indoctrination is the systematic, often intentional process of instilling a set of beliefs, values, or ideology into individuals or groups without encouraging critical examination or dissent, typically through repetition, appeals to authority or emotion, and social pressure to enforce conformity. There are four key aspects of this definition. Indoctrination is systematic and intentional. It isn't just picking up ideas. It's a coordinated effort by institutions, leaders, or communities to transmit a core doctrine. It also requires non-critical transmission. Questions and challenges are discouraged or framed as disloyalty. Independent reasoning is sidelined in favor of rote acceptance. There's also repetition and authority. Messages are reinforced constantly via sermons, slogans, rituals, or charismatic leaders so that the belief becomes second nature. And then there are the emotional and social levers. Indoctrination uses fear of exclusion or punishment, or hope of reward or salvation, or even identity-based belonging to bind people to the ideology. With this as our foundation, we can more precisely examine how each of the four levels of indoctrination we're mapping today employs these mechanisms and tailor the right counter strategies. So let's start with the first one, the cultural level of indoctrination. This is superficial social alignment. The core identity here is belief as social ritual, not conviction. People at this level often participate in religious or political customs because that's what everyone else does, not because they've thought it through. Now, the psychology behind this is that it's driven by conformity and fear of social exclusion. The reward comes from blending in, whether it's family dinners, holidays, or community status, so beliefs remain unexamined. Now, some behavioral markers here are people at the cultural level of indoctrination can rarely articulate more than boilerplate doctrines. Attendance and statements of beliefs are more about belonging than conviction. There's a low resistance to polite questioning, yet equally low motivation to explore deeper. There's also social context to consider here. Neighborhoods, workplaces, and schools where the majority holds the same shallow beliefs. Deviating risks awkwardness or ostracism, but leaving involves little personal cost beyond small talk. So in effect, what keeps most people in the cultural level is just simply that most people believe this. This level is shallow belief, but identification with belief is about social acceptance by the perceived majority. In my opinion, very little will actually change their minds. They are less likely to engage in inquiry or debate because outside of the social utility, they don't give that type of thought to their belief, only the idea that everybody can't be wrong. Now, the spread of highly attractive superstition-free community centers that they can blend into without renouncing beliefs as an entry requirement will likely be the best route to allow them to see life without belief as an acceptable social norm. So let's talk about the next level, the communal level. This is where belief is perceived as group membership and routine. The core identity here is that faith or ideology is woven into weekly rhythms and life plans. This is my group, my church, or even my party. It's part of how they organize time, holidays, and friendships. Now, the psychology behind this is that these people are moderately reflective. People here can entertain doubts, but their primary loyalty is to the group. They measure truth by community consensus. Behavioral markers here is that they will engage in internal debates. Is our church too liberal, too traditional? But they'll rarely question the overarching belief system itself. When challenged, they're more likely to switch to a similar group than to abandon the belief altogether. They will invest time, money, and social energy in group activities like volunteering and committees. Let's also hit some of the social context. For the communal, these are tight-knit congregational clubs or political caucuses that offer identity, purpose, and social capital. Doubts emerge in moments of conflict or outside contact, but the default is in-group loyalty. My group believes this, so this level is a little more entrenched as the belief now impacts routine and life plans across a spectrum. They may think more deeply about their faith while not fully committing to church leadership. They tend to be more likely to question their faith, which often leads to switching groups rather than deconversion. In other words, they may become Pentecostal instead of Baptist, or they may become Methodist instead of Pentecostal. They are more likely to deconvert after being exposed to dissonance, debate, and critical discussion. Now let's talk about the third level of indoctrination, the critical level. At this moment, belief becomes a personal necessity and life narrative. The core identity here is that faith is fused to personal history, trauma, testimony, or profound life events that proved the belief to them. To question it is to question their very life story. Let's unpack the psychology behind this. These people have a high emotional investment, so cognitive dissonance becomes existential. If this isn't true, then what happened to me? This is the sunk cost and trauma bond territory. Let's highlight a few behavioral markers. There is intense defensiveness or stoic despair when beliefs are questioned. They will often use personal anecdotes as God healed me or God saw me through as irrefutable evidence. They'll also sometimes have possibly radical behavior, extreme charity, extreme self-denial, or even public witness as proof of sincerity. Now, within the social context, this is often tied to support networks that emerged around the crisis moments, whether those are recovery groups, conversion testimonies, or I was saved communities. The belief becomes a shield against re-experiencing trauma or shame. I have to believe this is where they are. At this level, there is likely a trauma bond at work, such as traumatic testimony or deeply held shame about something that has either happened to them or something they did to others. In other words, I have to believe this in order for those things to be valid. Otherwise, what does that really say about me or my life? For them, faith is so personal that it easily borders the pathological. They will have likely become radicalized by Paul's writings with ideas of becoming a fool for Christ. So having to wrestle with that foolishness and its consequences will likely be the biggest barrier to their deconversion. They need trauma-informed support groups that exist within larger superstition-free communities to reduce the development of new trauma bonds by providing for a variety of interests and opportunities for engagement. And now let's hit the fourth level, the cult level, where belief becomes absolute authority over self-agency. The core identity here is total relinquishment of personal decision-making to leaders or institutions. Here, faith isn't just held, it commands every thought and action. Let's unpack the psychology. Typically, there's going to be deep dependency and learned helplessness. Autonomy is perceived as dangerous. Obedience is safety. A few behavioral markers here to watch for are unquestioning acceptance of leadership's dictates, even when they contradict personal evidence or ethics. There are also severe social penalties that can be shunning or even family estrangement for independent thought. And these people are often recruited through isolation, incremental commitment, and control of information. Now, the social context is going to be high control environments, literal cults, extremist movements, or authoritarian organizations where group cohesion is maintained through fear, ritual, or the promise of absolute certainty. In this level, the people say, I refuse to believe anything other than this. When examining those who have come to this place in their belief, we find it really hard to pin down any real descriptive trajectory or home of origin. People who become cult-like in their acceptance of ideas span the gamut from orphans in trailer parks to multi-generational millionaires. The only thing I can say here is that these people in most cases have completely relinquished the idea that they can be trusted, maybe because of childhood trauma or recent incidents, and feel the need to entrust someone else with their life for their own safety. This is full-blown indoctrination, and I fear the only way to truly help people like this is to normalize critical thinking and the application of personal agency, autonomy, and authenticity in all areas that intersect with public life. These people have typically given over the responsibility of decision making to others or institutions. This is not just people who drink the Kool-Aid. This is people who disown their children over science they've never even tried to understand. They begin to crave environments where they no longer have to bear the responsibility of their own decisions. Now, across all levels, what's shifting isn't just what people believe, but how belief functions in their lives. From a light social veneer for the cultural level, to a core social structure for the communal level, to a personal lifeline for the critical level, and to a totalizing worldview that replaces self-agency at the cult level. Recognizing these distinctions help us understand why some people drift away almost effortlessly, while others remain anchored or even radicalized despite evidence or empathy. Now let's talk about how these four levels stack up on prevalence, risk, and fixability, and what realistic hope looks like even at the deepest end. So let's start with which one of these is likely to be most globally prevalent. I'd say the cultural level. Why? Nearly everyone lives within a mesh of social norms, holidays, families, rites, and even civic rituals that carry religious or political overtones. In many countries, people continue the veneer of belief, I'm Christian, or I'm a Republican, or I'm a Democrat, I'm patriotic, long after the ideas have ceased to feel real. In much of Western Europe and East Asia, 50 to 70% still identify with a faith tradition, despite less than 10% regular attendance. That's classic cultural level alignment. In the US, over 60% say they're somewhat or very religious, but less than 30% attend weekly services. Let's talk about the most dangerous or the most problematic level. I think this one should be obvious. It's the cult level. Why? Here, belief overrides personal agency and critical thought. Outsourced decision-making can lead to abuse and exploitation, financial, emotional, even physical harm under the guise of obedience, social rupture, families torn apart by absolute us versus them demands, and even extremism, militant groups that justify violence or isolation. High control movements from destructively insular communities to violent extremist cells spring from this same dynamic of surrendered self-trust. So which of these levels would be likely the easiest to course correct? Again, I'd say it'd likely be the cultural level. Low personal investment means low friction for change. They haven't risked their identity, finances, or relationships on the belief, so a small nudge can often open the door to inquiry. The best strategies here are modeling. Showcase quiet deconversions or shadow membership in secular communities. No big announcement required. Safe curiosity. Polls, quizzes, did you know, bite-sized facts that disrupt assumptions without threatening belonging. And a few social alternatives, offering compelling community events, book clubs, service projects, branded as neutral but grounded in humanist values. So now, if the cult level is the most problematic, is there any hope for them? Absolutely. We need intensive, trauma-informed paths. Even at the most entrenched, change isn't impossible, but it requires exit counseling and safe harbor, spaces protected from leadership oversight where autonomy is affirmed. It needs peer support networks, former members who can say, I've been there, and model incremental agency, choosing a meeting topic and then a life choice. And then trauma-informed therapy, untangling the trauma bond so belief no longer masks past wounds. And then gradual reagency exercises, tiny decisions, pick the meal plan for the day that rebuild trust in self before tackling bigger life choices. Survivors of high control groups often tell of a moment, I chose what to wear, or I left with one suitcase, and that small act sets the larger journey in motion. Organizations like the International Cultic Studies Association report hundreds of successful recoveries each year when these steps are followed. In summary, cultural level beliefs are everywhere. People who surrender themselves to cult level indoctrination pose the greatest harm. Cultural level is the easiest to shift through social modeling and gentle inquiry, but even cult level recoveries happen through safe spaces, peer guides, and rebuilding self-trust, one small choice at a time. So now the big question is, how do we tip the scales? Well, not by doing nothing for sure, not by hoping and wishing, and not by railing and ranting. If any of us are seriously concerned, then we should be seriously doing something about that concern. In my estimation, the most effective way to tip the scales against indoctrination is the accelerated development of local secular community hubs that sponsor conversation, education, and community opportunities that are attractive and effective alternatives for superstition-based involvement. Think of it this way. Every week, you and a few dozen friends show up to the same place, not to recite creeds, but to share stories, tackle a small project, and genuinely hear one another. We reclaim the assembly model to form secular community hubs because it works. When people drift into a room on the same day at the same time, something powerful happens. Familiarity and routine breeds trust. Over time, that trust becomes the soil where real questions can grow rather than the fear of rocking the boat. Instead of "come believe this," you're saying "come see what we're building together." It shifts the focus from doctrine to doing. Whether that's planting a few flowers in the park, hosting a book swap, or simply learning to listen. A 5-minute check-in, how are you showing up this week, followed by a shared task creates shared ownership. When roles rotate, today you facilitate, next week you bring the coffee. You're training everyone to lead, to decide, to trust their judgment. That constant "I'm in charge of something small" practice chips away at the habit of deferring to authority and makes self-agency the new norm. And because these gatherings are open door, no pledge, no hidden curriculum, anyone can slip in, take the temperature, and leave if it's not for them. Over time, they stay because they've built friendships, felt capable, and discovered that they can ask hard questions without repercussion. That's how we starve out indoctrination, by replacing passive agreement with active participation. In short, the community assembly is more than a meeting. It's a living laboratory for autonomy, community, and curiosity. You're not just teaching skepticism, you're modeling it. And week by week, project by project, you're building a bridge out of superstition into shared human purpose. If this conversation resonated with you today, I'd like to encourage you to enroll in our free BC 101 How We Change the World course as a first step to being a part of our global community, Bridge City Global. You can connect with others while learning more about the vision in a low commitment space. And who knows, you may be one of the leaders that I've been waiting for in order to spark off the creation of local secular hubs. Check out the link in the description to get enrolled today. Well, that's all for this conversation. Don't forget to check out the accompaniment guide on Windows Shop for a deeper dive. And of course, until next time, keep rising.